For centuries, the galaxy had been a place of wonder and discovery. Countless species explored the stars, built civilizations, and shared knowledge. But all of that changed when the Zarnak arrived. These aliens were unlike anything anyone had ever seen before. They were tall, with dark, armored skin that shimmered like oil under light. Their eyes glowed red, and their voices sounded like grinding metal. The Zarnak didn't come to trade or make peace. They came to destroy. No one knew where they had come from or why they were so angry. All anyone knew was that they moved through the galaxy like a storm, leaving devastation in their wake. Entire planets were wiped out. Colonies were burned to ash. Billions of lives were lost. Humanity, which had only recently begun to explore beyond its own solar system, found itself on the brink of extinction. The human colonies scattered across the stars were easy targets for the Zarnak war machines. In this time of fear and chaos, there was one ship that still carried hope. It was called the Solstice Asterisk, a small but sturdy human warship. The Solstice wasn't new or shiny. Its hull was scared from battles, and its engines groaned under the strain of constant travel. But it was all humanity had left in this part of the galaxy. On board, Captain Laura Hayes led a crew of 50 brave men and women. They weren't soldiers by choice. Most of them had been civilians who stepped up when the Zarnak attacked. Now, they fought not just for survival, but for the future of their species. Laura was a strong leader, but she carried the weight of countless losses on her shoulders. She had seen too many friends die, too many planets fall. Still, she refused to give up. Every day, she reminded her crew why they were fighting. "We're all that's left," she would say. "If we don't stand against them, no one will." The Solstice patrolled the outer edges of known space, watching for any sign of the Zarnak. It was lonely work. Days turned into weeks without seeing another human face. Supplies were running low, and morale was even lower. But the crew stuck together, finding strength in each other. Daniel Carter, Laura's first officer, was her closest ally. He was calm and steady, always ready with a kind word or a practical solution. Emily Dawson, the communications officer, kept the ship connected to Earth Command, though the messages were few and far between. Then there was Alex Rivera and Karen Blake, two Marines who joked and teased to keep spirits high, even as they prepared for the next battle. One quiet morning, the Solstice was orbiting a barren planet called Silos 7. It was a dead world, with no air or water, just rocks and dust. The crew had stopped there to scan for resources, hoping to find something useful. That's when it happened. Emily picked up a faint signal coming from deep space. At first, she thought it was just static, but then she heard a voice. It was broken and distorted, but one word came through loud and clear: Zarnak. Laura rushed to the bridge, her heart pounding. "Where's it coming from?" she asked. Emily pointed to a nearby star system on the map. It was close, but not close enough to reach quickly. Laura stared at the screen, weighing her options. The signal could be a trap set by the Zarnak to lure unsuspecting ships, or it could be a cry for help from survivors. Either way, they couldn't ignore it. "What do you think, Daniel?" Laura asked, turning to her first officer. He frowned, thinking carefully before answering. "It's risky," he said, "but if there are people out there, we have to try. We can't turn our backs on them." Laura nodded. She knew he was right. Turning to the crew, she gave the order. "Set course for the signal. Let's see what's waiting for us." As the Solstice jumped into hyperspace, the crew braced themselves for whatever lay ahead. None of them knew what they would find, or if they would make it back alive. But they had chosen to fight, and they wouldn't stop now. Not while there was still a chance to strike back against the monsters that had terrorized the galaxy. The Solstice arrived at the source of the distress signal hours later. What they found was worse than anyone had imagined. The signal came from a small mining colony on the edge of a desolate asteroid field. From orbit, the colony looked like a graveyard. Ships lay in ruins around the docking platforms, their hulls torn open like tin cans. Buildings were reduced to rubble, and fires still burned in some areas, sending thick plumes of smoke into the thin atmosphere. Laura ordered the ship to land near what remained of the main structure. As the crew stepped onto the surface, they were hit by the eerie silence. There were no voices, no signs of life, just the crunch of broken metal and glass underfoot. The air smelled of burning plastic and something sharper, metallic. It was the smell of death. Laura signaled for her team to spread out and search for survivors. They moved cautiously, weapons drawn, scanning every shadow for movement. It didn't take long to find someone. Huddled in an underground bunker beneath the wreckage, they discovered a group of frightened colonists. There were only 7 of them, all covered in dirt and soot. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide with fear. One of them, a young woman with short brown hair, stepped forward. Her name was Rachel Meyer, and she introduced herself as one of the colony's engineers. She had been the one to send the distress signal before the Zarnak attacked. Rachel explained what had happened. The Zarnak fleet had arrived without warning, descending on the colony like predators. They didn't negotiate or ask questions. They simply destroyed everything in their path. Most of the colonists had been killed outright, while others were taken away, presumably as prisoners or slaves. Rachel and the others had managed to hide in the bunker, sealing themselves off until the attack ended. When they finally emerged, the colony was gone, reduced to ash and debris. But the worst part of Rachel's story was yet to come. She revealed that the Zarnak weren't just raiding colonies for resources. They were testing a new weapon. This weapon, she said, was unlike anything humanity had ever faced. It was designed to destabilize entire planets by manipulating their cores. Once activated, it would cause the ground to crack, the air to burn, and the oceans to boil. In short, it would make any world completely uninhabitable within hours. Rachel claimed the prototype was aboard the Zarnak flagship, currently stationed near a red dwarf star several light-years away. She had seen schematics for the weapon during her time working in the colony's engineering bay. Though she didn't know all the details, she believed the weapon was nearly ready for deployment. If the Zarnak succeeded in perfecting it, nothing, not even Earth itself, would be safe. Laura listened carefully, her mind racing. This changed everything. If what Rachel said was true, then stopping the Zarnak wasn't just about saving lives. It was about ensuring humanity's survival. But how could a single warship, damaged and outnumbered, hope to take on an entire alien fleet? The odds were impossible. Still, Laura knew they couldn't turn away. Not now. "What do you think?" Daniel asked quietly as they stood apart from the group. Laura hesitated, staring at the ruined colony around them. "I think we don't have a choice," she said finally. "If we don't stop them, no one will." Daniel nodded, though his expression was grim. He knew as well as she did that this mission would likely cost them everything. Laura turned back to the survivors. "We'll get you to safety," she promised. "But first, we need your help. Tell us everything you know about that weapon and how we can destroy it." Rachel nodded, determination flickering in her eyes. For the first time since the attack, she felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, these strangers could do what no one else had dared to try. As the Solstice prepared to leave the devastated colony behind, the crew worked quickly to gather supplies and information. Every second counted. The Zarnak flagship was far away, but the weapon's threat loomed closer with each passing moment. Laura stood on the bridge, gazing out at the stars. She didn't know if they would succeed, but she knew one thing for certain. Failure wasn't an option. The plan was risky, but it was the only chance they had. Laura gathered her crew on the bridge of the Solstice and explained what needed to be done. They would disguise the ship as a scavenger vessel, one of the many small, independent ships that roamed the galaxy looking for scraps from abandoned colonies. The Zarnak often ignored these ships, seeing them as too insignificant to bother with. If they could pull off the deception, the Solstice might slip past the enemy fleet unnoticed. To make the disguise work, the crew got to work modifying the ship's exterior. They covered the sleek, military-grade hull with rusted metal panels and scorch marks, making it look like it had been through years of hard use. They attached mismatched parts salvaged from old wrecks and even rigged up a fake cargo bay filled with junk. The ship's AI was reprogrammed to mimic the erratic flight patterns typical of scavengers, who rarely followed standard navigation protocols. As they approached the Zarnak blockade, tension filled the air. Every member of the crew knew that one wrong move could mean disaster. Laura stood at the helm, her hands gripping the controls tightly. Daniel was at her side, monitoring the sensors while Emily kept an ear on the comms for any sign of trouble. Alex and Karen were stationed near the weapons, ready to defend the ship if necessary. The first Zarnak cruiser appeared on the horizon, its massive form blotting out the stars. It was an intimidating sight, larger than anything the Solstice had faced before, bristling with weapons and glowing with ominous red lights. The crew held their breath as the cruiser scanned them. For a moment, it seemed like the ruse might fail. The cruiser's weapons powered up, and everyone braced for impact. Then, just as suddenly, the cruiser signaled them to proceed. They bought it, Emily whispered, relief washing over her face. No one cheered or celebrated. They knew the hardest part was still ahead. Once inside the perimeter, the Solstice positioned itself near the flagship, staying close enough to avoid suspicion, but far enough to give them time to act. Laura turned to Rachel, who had joined them on the bridge. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. Rachel nodded firmly. "I've seen the schematics," she said. "If we can get aboard, I can guide us to the weapon." Laura didn't like putting civilians in danger, but she also knew they couldn't do this without Rachel's knowledge. "All right," she said finally. "We'll split into 2 teams. One will stay here to keep the ship ready, and the other will go aboard the flagship." Daniel volunteered immediately, knowing his experience would be crucial. Alex and Karen joined him, along with Rachel. Laura hesitated before deciding to lead the boarding team herself. She couldn't ask others to take risks she wasn't willing to take. As they suited up in stolen Zarnak armor and prepared their equipment, Laura gave the team one last briefing. "Stay sharp," she said. "This is enemy territory. Don't trust anything or anyone." Minutes later, the boarding pod detached from the Solstice and drifted toward the flagship. The journey felt endless, every second stretching into hours. When they docked, the team moved quickly, slipping into the dark corridors of the alien ship. The interior was cold and oppressive, lit by pulsating red lights that cast long shadows. Strange symbols lined the walls, and the air hummed with energy. Their first challenge came almost immediately. A group of Zarnak soldiers patrolled the area, their heavy footsteps echoing down the hallway. Laura signaled for the team to hide behind a stack of crates. They waited silently, barely breathing, until the patrol passed. Once the coast was clear, they continued onward, guided by Rachel's directions. Every step felt heavier than the last. The flagship was a maze of twisting corridors and locked doors, each one requiring careful planning to bypass. The tension was palpable, and the weight of their mission pressed down on them. They were deep in enemy territory now, surrounded by enemies who would kill them without hesitation if discovered. But they pressed on, driven by the knowledge that failure meant the end, not just for them, but for everyone. The team moved deeper into the Zarnak flagship, their footsteps muffled by the thick, metallic floors. The air grew colder with each passing moment, and the hum of the ship's systems seemed to grow louder, almost as if the vessel itself was alive and watching them. Rachel led the way, her eyes darting between the map on her handheld device and the alien symbols etched into the walls. She whispered directions to Laura, who signaled the others to follow. They reached a large door marked with glowing red glyphs. Rachel hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "This is it," she said. "The weapon should be on the other side." Daniel stepped forward, and examined the control panel beside the door. It was unlike anything human technology had ever created, smooth, black, and pulsating faintly with light. He pulled out a small hacking tool and began working on the panel, his fingers moving quickly despite the tension in the air. Seconds later, the door hissed open, revealing a massive chamber beyond. The team froze in awe at what they saw. The weapon dominated the room, a towering structure of twisted metal and glowing conduits. Its core pulsed with an unnatural energy, casting eerie shadows across the walls. It looked like something out of a nightmare, a machine designed not just to destroy, but to annihilate entire worlds without mercy. "We don't have much time," Rachel said, snapping everyone back to reality. She rushed toward a nearby console and began entering commands, her hands shaking slightly. Laura and the others spread out to cover her, keeping watch for any sign of trouble. The room was eerily quiet, save for the low hum of the weapon and the occasional clink of metal as Alex adjusted his grip on his rifle. Then, without warning, alarms blared throughout the chamber. Red lights flashed, bathing everything in a harsh crimson glow. "They know we're here," Daniel shouted. Almost instantly, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the corridor outside. A squad of Zarnak soldiers stormed into the room, their weapons raised and their glowing red eyes locked onto the intruders. "Keep them busy," Laura ordered, firing her weapon to create a barrier between the team and the advancing enemies. Alex and Karen returned fire, their shots ricocheting off the armored bodies of the Zarnak. The aliens were relentless, charging forward with terrifying speed. Sparks flew as bullets hit the walls and machinery around them. Rachel worked frantically at the console, sweat dripping down her face. "I'm almost there," she called out, her voice strained. But the situation was growing desperate. The Zarnak kept coming, wave after wave, forcing the team to retreat closer to the weapon. Karen took a hit to her shoulder, grunting in pain but refusing to fall back. "I'm fine," she snapped when Daniel tried to help her. Then disaster struck. One of the Zarnak warriors flanked the group and lunged at Karen, knocking her to the ground. Before anyone could react, the alien raised its weapon to deliver the killing blow. Without hesitation, Karen rolled away and fired her last round directly into the creature's chest. As it collapsed, another Zarnak soldier appeared behind her. This time, she wasn't fast enough. "Karen!" Alex screamed as she fell. For a split second, he froze, staring at his fallen comrade. Then, with a roar of fury, he charged forward, unleashing a barrage of gunfire that drove the remaining Zarnak back. His bravery gave the team a brief reprieve, but the cost was devastating. Laura glanced over at Rachel, who was still typing furiously at the console. "How much longer?" she demanded. 30 seconds, Rachel replied, her voice trembling. Laura turned to Daniel. "We need to hold them off. Can you buy us some time?" Daniel nodded grimly. "Go," he said. "I'll hold the line." With tears in her eyes, Laura obeyed. She grabbed Rachel and dragged her further into the chamber, putting distance between them and the fighting. Daniel stayed behind, taking up position near the entrance. He fired shot after shot, his movements precise and calm even as the odds stacked against him. When his ammunition ran out, he switched to hand-to-hand combat, using every ounce of strength to keep the Zarnak at bay. Finally, Rachel's voice broke through the chaos. "It's done. The weapon is offline." Laura didn't hesitate. She pulled Rachel to her feet and yelled, "Fall back. Now." As they ran toward the exit, Daniel shouted after them, "Go. I'll hold them off." His voice was steady, but his injuries were obvious. Blood soaked his armor, and his breathing was labored. "No," Laura cried, turning back. But Daniel shook his head firmly. "You have to go. Finish this, for all of us." Reluctantly, Laura followed Rachel out of the chamber, leaving Daniel behind. As they disappeared into the corridor, the sounds of battle faded, replaced by the ominous groan of the destabilizing flagship. They didn't look back. They couldn't. The team sprinted through the dark, twisting corridors of the Zarnok flagship, their hearts pounding in their chests. Behind them, the ship groaned and shuddered as its systems began to fail. The weapons shutdown had triggered a chain reaction, destabilizing the entire vessel. Alarms blared louder than ever, and the red emergency lights flickered erratically, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. Laura led the way, gripping Rachel's arm tightly to keep her moving. Alex followed close behind, his face pale and streaked with sweat, still clutching his rifle despite running low on ammunition. "Keep moving," Laura shouted over the noise. "We're not out yet." Every step felt heavier than the last, not just from exhaustion, but from the weight of what they'd left behind. Daniel's voice echoed in their minds, his final order to leave him behind. None of them wanted to believe it was truly over for him, but deep down, they knew the truth. He had sacrificed himself so they could escape, and now they had to honor that sacrifice by making it out alive. As they neared the docking bay, the ship lurched violently, throwing them off balance. Rachel stumbled and nearly fell, but Laura caught her just in time. "Stay with me," Laura said firmly, her voice cutting through the chaos. They couldn't afford to slow down. Not now. The flagship was falling apart around them, its metal walls groaning under the strain. Sparks rained down from exposed wires, and the air grew hotter with each passing second. When they finally reached the docking bay, relief washed over them, but only briefly. Their boarding pod was still there, waiting for them, but the door leading to the bay was sealed shut. Alex cursed under his breath and immediately set to work trying to pry it open. "Hurry," Laura urged, glancing over her shoulder. The sounds of collapsing bulkheads and distant explosions were getting closer. Time was running out. Rachel stepped forward, her hands trembling as she examined the control panel beside the door. "Let me try," she said. Her fingers flew over the alien interface, entering commands based on what she'd learned during their mission. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a loud hiss, the door slid open, revealing the chaotic scene beyond. Debris floated in the zero-gravity environment of the docking bay, and the Solstice boarding pod hung precariously from its moorings, damaged by the ship's instability. "Go, go, go," Laura shouted, pushing Rachel toward the pod first. Alex followed, pausing only to fire a few shots at a group of Zarnok soldiers who had appeared at the far end of the bay. The aliens returned fire, forcing Laura to dive for cover behind a chunk of fallen debris. Bullets ricocheted off the metal around her, narrowly missing her head. She gritted her teeth and made a break for the pod, sliding inside just as Alex slammed the hatch shut behind her. "Get us out of here," Laura yelled to the pilot, who wasted no time firing up the engines. The pod detached from the flagship and shot away into the void of space, leaving the doomed vessel behind. Through the small viewport, they watched in silence as the flagship erupted in a massive explosion, sending shockwaves rippling through the surrounding area. The blast was so powerful that it knocked the pod off course momentarily, jolting everyone inside. For a long moment, no one spoke. The reality of what they'd just been through, and who they'd lost, was too heavy to put into words. Rachel sat hunched over, staring at her hands, while Alex leaned against the wall, his head bowed. Laura stared out at the wreckage, her jaw clenched tight. She thought about Daniel, about Karen, and about all the others who had given their lives to make this mission possible. It wasn't fair. None of it was fair. But they had done it. Against all odds, they had succeeded. The weapon was destroyed, and the Zarnok's terrifying new technology was no longer a threat. That knowledge didn't bring their friends back, but it gave their deaths meaning. When the pod finally docked with the Solstice, Emily and the rest of the crew greeted them with a mixture of relief and sorrow. There were no cheers or celebrations, just quiet nods and exchanged glances. Laura took a deep breath and addressed the crew. "We did what we came here to do," she said, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. "Now let's get home." As the asterisk solstice asterisk turned away from the wreckage and prepared to jump into hyperspace, Laura gazed out at the stars. The galaxy was still dangerous, and the fight was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to feel a glimmer of hope. They had struck a blow against the Zarnuk, a blow that proved humanity wasn't ready to give up. And as long as there were people willing to fight, there was always a chance for a better future. The Solstice limped through space, its battered hull groaning with every jump into hyperspace. The ship had survived the mission, but it bore the scars of battle. Scorch marks from enemy fire, dents from debris, and systems pushed far beyond their limits. Inside, the mood was somber. The crew moved quietly, their faces pale and drawn. They had won, but the cost had been high. Daniel and Karen were gone, along with countless others who had given their lives to stop the Zarnuk weapon. The weight of those losses hung over the ship like a shadow. Laura stood on the bridge, staring out at the endless expanse of stars. Her hands rested on the railing, her knuckles white from gripping it too tightly. She hadn't slept since the mission ended, and dark circles ringed her eyes. Every time she closed them, she saw Daniel's face, heard his final words telling her to go. She couldn't shake the feeling that she should have done more, that somehow she could have saved him. But there was no going back now. All she could do was press forward and make sure his sacrifice wasn't wasted. Emily approached cautiously, holding a data pad in her hands. "Captain," she said softly, not wanting to startle her. Laura turned, forcing herself to focus. "What is it?" she asked, her voice hoarse from lack of use. Emily hesitated before speaking. "We're being followed," she said. "2 Zarnuk cruisers are tailing us. They're gaining ground." Laura's heart sank. Of course they were being pursued. The explosion of the flagship must have drawn attention, and now the Zarnuk were hunting them down. The asterisk solstice asterisk was in no condition for another fight. Its weapons were depleted, its engines struggling to maintain speed, and its shields barely holding together. Still, they had no choice but to stand their ground. If the Zarnuk caught them, they would learn everything: the location of Earth, the plans for resistance, and the truth about humanity's defiance. That knowledge could not fall into enemy hands. "Bring us out of hyperspace," Laura ordered, her voice firm despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "Let's see what we're dealing with." Moments later, the asterisk solstice asterisk dropped out of hyperspace, emerging near a cluster of asteroids. The 2 Zarnuk cruisers appeared on the horizon, massive and menacing. Their weapons powered up, glowing ominously as they prepared to fire. "Weapons online," Alex reported from the gunnery station, though his tone made it clear how dire their situation was. "But we don't have much left. One good hit, and we're done for." Laura nodded grimly. She knew what they had to do. "Emily, plot a course through the asteroid field," she said. "Use the rocks as cover. We'll lead them into the chaos and hope they make a mistake." The plan was risky, but it was their only chance. As the asterisk solstice asterisk darted into the asteroid field, the Zarnuk cruisers followed, their larger size making navigation difficult. Rocks tumbled around them, some as big as mountains, others small enough to shatter against the ship's weakened shields. Laura maneuvered the asterisk solstice asterisk with precision, dodging collisions while keeping the enemy ships in range. The crew worked tirelessly, adjusting shields, firing shots, and monitoring the ship's failing systems. For a moment, it seemed like they might actually pull it off. The Zarnuk cruisers struggled to keep up, their bulkier frames scraping against the asteroids. Then, disaster struck. A stray rock slammed into the asterisk solstice asterisk, tearing a hole in the hull and sending sparks flying across the bridge. Alarms blared as oxygen levels began to drop. "Damage report," Laura shouted, fighting to keep the ship steady. "Section 3 is breached." Alex called back, his voice tense. "We've lost life support in that area." Laura clenched her jaw. They couldn't afford to lose any more of the crew, or the ship itself. "Seal it off," she ordered. "Divert all remaining power to the engines and shields. We're not dying here." With renewed determination, the crew pushed the Solstice to its limits. Using the asteroid field to their advantage, they lured one of the cruisers into a trap. A well-timed shot disabled its engines, leaving it drifting helplessly. The second cruiser hesitated, unsure whether to continue the pursuit or retreat. That hesitation gave the Solstice the opening it needed. With a final burst of speed, the ship broke free from the asteroid field and jumped back into hyperspace, leaving the Zarnak behind. As the stars blurred outside the viewport, the crew let out a collective sigh of relief. They weren't safe yet, not by a long shot, but they had survived another day. Laura sank into her chair, exhaustion washing over her. The galaxy was still dangerous, and the war was far from over. But for now, they had lived to fight another day. And that, she realized, was something worth holding on to. Weeks passed before the Solstice finally reached Earth. The journey had been long and grueling, with the crew working around the clock to keep the damaged ship running. Repairs were made with whatever scraps they could find, and food rations grew thinner with each passing day. But despite the hardships, there was a sense of pride among the crew. They had faced the Zarnak and lived to tell the tale. What they carried back wasn't just news of their victory. It was proof that humanity could fight back. When the Solstice entered Earth's orbit, it was greeted by a fleet of ships. News of its return had spread quickly, and the United Earth Assembly had mobilized every available vessel to escort the warship home. Laura stood on the bridge, watching as the lights of the welcoming fleet filled the viewport. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself a small smile. They weren't just survivors, they were heroes. The landing was chaotic, but celebratory. Crowds gathered at the spaceport, cheering and waving flags as the Solstice touched down. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, and dignitaries waited anxiously to hear the story of what had happened. Laura stepped off the ship first, her uniform patched and worn, but her posture straight and proud. Behind her came the rest of the crew, their faces tired but determined. Rachel walked beside them, clutching a data pad containing everything she knew about the Zarnak weapon. Laura was ushered into a meeting with the United Earth Assembly, where she delivered her report. She spoke plainly, without embellishment, detailing the mission from start to finish. She told them about the mining colony, the weapon, and the sacrifice of her crew. When she mentioned Daniel and Karen, her voice faltered, but she didn't stop. These were stories that needed to be told, not just for those who had died, but for everyone still alive. The assembly listened in stunned silence. When Laura finished, the room erupted into applause. Humanity had been on the brink of despair, but now there was hope. The destruction of the Zarnak weapon proved that the invaders weren't invincible. If a single warship could strike such a blow, then a united effort might turn the tide of the war entirely. In the days that followed, Laura became a symbol of resistance. Her face appeared on broadcasts across the globe, inspiring millions to join the fight against the Zarnak. Volunteers poured in from every corner of Earth, eager to defend their planet. Factories worked overtime to produce new ships, weapons, and supplies. For the first time in years, humanity felt united. But for Laura, the attention brought little comfort. She attended ceremonies and gave speeches, but her thoughts were always with those she had lost. At night, she would sit alone in her quarters, staring at a photo of her crew before the mission. Daniel's steady gaze, Karen's confident grin, they haunted her dreams. She knew their deaths had not been in vain, but that knowledge didn't make the pain any easier to bear. Still, she refused to give up. The galaxy was counting on her, and she wouldn't let them down. When Earth Command offered her a promotion to Admiral and command of the newly formed coalition fleet, she accepted without hesitation. It was an enormous responsibility, but she knew it was where she belonged. "We've taken the first step," she told the assembly during her acceptance speech. "Now we have to finish what we started." The Coalition fleet was unlike anything humanity had ever assembled. Ships from allied species joined human vessels, creating a force diverse in both technology and culture. Pilots, engineers, and soldiers from dozens of worlds trained together, learning to fight as one. Laura worked tirelessly to prepare them for battle, drilling strategies and coordinating logistics. She pushed herself harder than ever, determined to honor the memory of her fallen comrades. As the fleet prepared for its first major offensive, Laura stood on the bridge of the Solstice now repaired and upgraded. The scars of its previous battles remained, a reminder of how far they had come. Outside, the stars shone brightly, endless and unknowable. Laura took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what lay ahead. The war was far from over, but for the first time, she felt ready. "Set course for the heart of Zarnok territory," she ordered, her voice steady. The crew sprang into action, their movements sharp and practiced. As the fleet jumped into hyperspace, Laura gazed out at the swirling colors of the jump. They were no longer running or hiding. This time, they were taking the fight to the enemy. And this time, they wouldn't stop until the galaxy was free. The Coalition fleet moved like a storm across the galaxy, its ships united under one banner. Laura led the charge from the bridge of the Solstice, her eyes fixed on the tactical display showing their progress. The Zarnok had terrorized countless worlds for centuries, but now they faced something new, a force that refused to back down. Humanity and its allies were no longer scattered or divided. They had become a single, unstoppable wave of resistance. As the fleet approached the heart of Zarnok territory, tension filled the air. This was where the enemy's power was strongest, where their largest fleets gathered around their central stronghold. It was a fortress world, surrounded by layers of defenses and guarded by hundreds of warships. To attack it was madness, but the Coalition had no other choice. If they wanted to end the war, they had to strike at the source. Laura addressed the fleet over comms, her voice calm but firm. "This is it," she said. "Everything we fought for has brought us here. Today, we take back the galaxy." Her words echoed through the ships, rallying the crews. Pilots checked their weapons, engineers fine-tuned engines, and soldiers prepared for boarding actions. Every person knew the stakes, and every person was ready. The battle began with a massive assault on the outer defenses. The Coalition ships split into squadrons, each tasked with taking out key targets. The Solstice led the charge against the enemy's shield generators, drawing heavy fire as it sped toward its objective. Explosions lit up space as missiles and energy beams crisscrossed between the ships. The Zarnok fought fiercely, their larger vessels unleashing devastating barrages that shook even the sturdiest human and allied craft. "Shields are holding, but just barely," Emily shouted from her station, sweat dripping down her face. Laura didn't respond. She couldn't afford to lose focus. Her hands gripped the controls tightly as she maneuvered the Solstice through the chaos, dodging blasts while firing back with everything they had. Alex and Karen's replacements manned the guns, their shots finding their marks with precision. Each hit brought them closer to victory, but also closer to destruction. Finally, the shield generators fell, opening a path to the fortress world itself. The Coalition fleet surged forward, breaking through the weakened defenses. The Zarnok scrambled to regroup, sending wave after wave of reinforcements to hold the line. But the Coalition pressed on relentlessly, driven by desperation and determination. Ships collided in fiery explosions, debris scattering across the void. Yet still, the fleet advanced. When the Solstice reached orbit around the fortress world, Laura gave the order to deploy ground teams. Armed squads boarded the planet's surface, targeting command centers and supply depots. Rachel accompanied one of these teams, using her knowledge of Zarnok technology to disable critical systems. Despite the danger, she worked quickly, her hand steady as she hacked into alien consoles. "This should cripple them," she said, typing furiously. Behind her, Marines kept watch, fending off waves of Zarnok soldiers. Meanwhile, Laura coordinated the orbital bombardment, ensuring the fleet struck strategic locations without causing unnecessary civilian casualties. The Zarnok may have been cruel, but many of the species they enslaved deserved a chance to rebuild. As the fortress world's defenses crumbled, the enemy's resolve began to falter. Their once unstoppable fleets retreated, leaving behind only scattered remnants. By the time the battle ended, the fortress world lay silent, its towers dark, and its skies empty. The coalition fleet had won, not just the battle, but the war. Cheers erupted across the ships as news of the victory spread. For the first time in generations, the galaxy was free from the Zarnok's grip. Laura stood on the bridge, gazing at the stars. She thought of Daniel, Karen, and all the others who had given their lives to make this moment possible. Their sacrifices had not been in vain. A brighter future awaited the galaxy, one built on unity and hope. And though the scars of war would remain, so too would the courage of those who had fought for peace.